Welcome to Affair Crimes Uncovered. Enjoy this true crime story.
In the small, quiet town of Cirebon, Indonesia, the people valued family above all else. Neighbors were more than just people living next door. They were like extended family, and respect for elders, especially men of religious standing, was ingrained in every aspect of life. Within this close-knit community, one family stood out: the household of Ustad Karim, a well-known and respected Islamic cleric. Ustad Karim was a man of discipline and tradition, leading the local mosque and counseling the townsfolk on matters of faith and morality. People looked up to him, holding him in high regard. He was not only admired but trusted, a pillar of the town's values. For Alya, a 17-year-old girl with a gentle nature and quiet disposition, Ustad Karim was more than just her mother's elder brother. After her father's death in a tragic accident when she was only 11, Karim had stepped in, assuming the role of a father figure. He filled the void, offering her guidance and support, and she respected him deeply. In a way, Alya felt closer to him than to her own mother, who often worked long hours as a seamstress to support their modest lifestyle. Almost every weekend, Alya would visit her uncle's house to help with chores and to watch his 3 young children, while he and his wife, Ibu Farida, attended to community matters. Karim's home was large and welcoming, a place where Alya felt safe and cared for. The children adored her, and she was happy to help, feeling that she was doing her part for the family that had taken her under its wing during hard times. However, in the weeks leading up to Ramadan, Alya began noticing subtle shifts in Karim's behavior. He would call her into the room under the guise of discussing her studies or helping him organize paperwork, but these interactions began to feel different. At first, Alya brushed off the discomfort as a misunderstanding. She trusted him entirely, and any discomfort she felt was surely, she thought, a mistake on her part. But the uneasy feeling persisted, like a splinter beneath her skin, small yet relentless. One afternoon, while she was cleaning up after lunch, Karim entered the room and closed the door behind him. He approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder, holding it a little longer than necessary. His hand slid slowly down her back, and Alya felt herself freeze in place. His voice was low and gentle as he spoke to her about her role in the family and her responsibilities to uphold their honor. But his words sounded wrong, as if wrapped in something dark. Alya's heart raced, a swell of fear and confusion rising in her chest. She felt trapped, unable to move or to pull away, as if the very air in the room had thickened around her. She wanted to scream, to call out, but the respect, the trust she had once held for him, seemed to paralyze her voice. Karim's voice became more insistent and his hands less respectful, but when he finally let her go, he simply left the room as if nothing had happened. She stood there, silent and numb, staring at the spot where he had been. Alya felt the weight of shame, guilt, and confusion all at once, unable to process what had just happened. Her thoughts spiraled, trying to rationalize his actions. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe I imagined it. She was desperate to cling to the idea of Karim as her protector, her father figure, but deep down she knew something had shifted irreparably. This wasn't the last time. Over the following months, Karim's actions grew bolder, his touches more invasive, always masked by the pretense of familial care and guidance. Alya became a shadow of her former self, retreating into silence, bearing the weight of the abuse alone. She feared the consequences of speaking up, the shame it would bring her mother, the disbelief she might face from her community. After all, who would believe her over Ustad Karim, the revered cleric? Days turned into weeks, and the silent torment continued. Alya's once bright spirit dimmed. She felt disconnected from her family, from her friends, even from herself. At night, she would lay awake, tears streaming down her face, replaying each incident in her mind. The betrayal twisted inside her, an ache that grew heavier with each passing day. One night, as she sat alone by the window, the weight of her pain gave way to something else: anger. Karim had taken her trust, her sense of safety, her innocence. She knew that he relied on her silence, on her fear. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't let him continue this without consequences. She couldn't let him get away with it, to continue living his life of respect and admiration while she bore the scars of his actions in silence. The idea of revenge began to seed itself in her mind. small and almost imperceptible at first, but growing stronger with each passing day. Alya was done feeling powerless. She knew she would have to be careful. This was no simple feat. If she was going to take action, she would need to be meticulous. Karim had always controlled her with the threat of his authority, but now she would control him, with silence, patience, and precision. The cycle of Karim's abuse wore Alya down, robbing her of joy and leaving her isolated in her own home. At school, she drifted through her classes in silence, barely speaking to her friends, her once bright eyes now clouded with fear and shame. Her mother noticed the changes in her, but each time she asked, Alya just forced a smile, too afraid and ashamed to tell the truth. Then one night, something inside her shifted. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with bitter memories. She thought of her father, how much he had loved her, how he'd taught her to be brave, to stand up for herself. But she was silent now, locked in a prison of fear. It wasn't only her life that Karim had shattered. He had taken away her voice, her sense of self. Alya's pain transformed into anger, a fierce and blinding rage. She clenched her fists, and her breaths came short and quick. She realized then that if she stayed silent, Karim would continue, unchecked, living his life with the respect of the community and the adoration of his family. He would be free, while she would remain imprisoned by the memories of what he had done. She decided then that she would not be his victim anymore. If no one else would punish him, she would take matters into her own hands. Over the next few days, she forced herself to think logically, setting aside her fear. She began observing Karim even more closely, watching his patterns and behaviors, committing every detail to memory. She knew she couldn't act impulsively. She had to be precise and prepared. Each moment she spent around him, she channeled her anger into a grim focus, keeping her emotions hidden. Alya knew that this anger was all she had left, and she would use it to make him pay. Alya's plan was delicate, calculated. She kept her anger well hidden, maintaining the same quiet demeanor that everyone was accustomed to. She continued visiting her uncle's home, helping with chores, caring for his children, and acting as though nothing had changed. Behind her composed mask, however, Alya watched Karim closely, taking note of his routines, his weaknesses. One day, she overheard Karim discussing plans to travel to a nearby village for a small religious gathering, where he'd be expected to stay the night. It was an ideal opportunity. With his absence, she could set her plan in motion without suspicion. She began gathering what she needed, careful to leave no trace of her intentions. The night before he was to leave, Alya visited Karim's home under the guise of helping his wife prepare for the trip. She cooked and cleaned, the perfect niece, all while her mind rehearsed every detail of her plan. Planning her revenge became Alya's sole purpose, a dark mission that kept her going through the days and nights. She spent hours reading online and asking innocent-sounding questions of her classmates, piecing together ideas that could help her exact justice. Every detail mattered, and she crafted a plan so intricate that Karim would never suspect her. Alya knew that Karim often lectured in nearby villages, and that he would typically return late at night. She also knew his habit of walking home alone on a quiet path through the fields rather than taking the longer, safer route by the road. She would use this against him. After weeks of mentally rehearsing, she committed to her plan, down to the smallest detail. To cover her tracks, Alya carefully prepared an alibi. She made sure to mention to her mother and her classmates that she had schoolwork to catch up on, so no one would expect her to leave the house that night. She even planted a few items in her room to make it seem as though she was studying. Textbooks, a notebook, and a lamp left on by the window, making it appear that she was simply burning the midnight oil. On the day Karim was scheduled to return from his lecture, Alya visited her aunt, Ibu Farida, in the afternoon. She helped prepare a meal for when Karim came home and played with his young children. Karim returned briefly in the evening to eat before heading back to the mosque for evening prayers, not noticing the coldness in Alya's gaze as she observed his every movement. She bid him goodbye with a tight-lipped smile, mentally rehearsing the steps of her plan. When dusk fell, she left her house, wrapping herself in a dark, hooded jacket, blending into the night. The path Karim took was lined with fields and a few tall trees. a secluded area where they would not be seen. The next evening, Alya waited for her mother to fall asleep before sneaking out into the humid night. She knew Karim's route back from the village, a narrow path that cut through the fields and led directly into the back alleys of town. She hid in the shadows, her heart pounding, waiting for him to appear. When Karim finally came into view, she stepped out of the shadows, her face calm but her eyes cold. Karim looked startled, then amused. He greeted her, the false kindness in his voice sharp against the quiet night. But Alya didn't respond. She moved closer, and before Karim could react, she struck. Her attack was swift, a culmination of all the pain and anger she'd held inside. The scene was violent and swift, leaving Karim wounded and humiliated. She didn't linger, disappearing into the night as quickly as she had appeared. Karim was left in shock, both at her audacity and the fierce anger he had never expected to see in his quiet niece. The night air was thick and silent as Alya positioned herself near a large tree along Karim's path. She took deep, steady breaths, her heart pounding with anticipation. She gripped a small knife she had brought along, not to harm him fatally, but as a means to frighten him, to turn the tables and make him feel the fear he had inflicted upon her. Alya waited, the minutes stretching into eternity. She felt her muscles tense, the cold night air biting at her skin, but she didn't move. Her mind was clear, focused solely on what she was about to do. The anger that had burned within her for months now manifested as a chilling calm. She was prepared, steeled by the pain that had weighed her down for too long. Finally, she saw him. Karim walked briskly, his figure silhouetted against the faint light of the town in the distance. Alya waited until he was close, until she could hear his footsteps before stepping into his path. Karim stopped, his expression shifting from confusion to surprise, and then a hint of fear. "Alya?" he asked, his voice shaky. She saw his eyes dart around, realizing how isolated they were, that no one was there to witness what was about to unfold. "I've come to finish what you started," she said, her voice low and unwavering. Karim's face fell, his confident demeanor crumbling as he saw the knife glint in her hand. Alya could see the realization in his eyes, the fear, the vulnerability. For the first time, he was powerless before her. He tried to step back, but Alya advanced, pressing the knife's tip just against his throat, careful not to break the skin. "Do you feel it now?" she whispered. "Do you feel what it's like to be powerless?" Karim's bravado faded. He raised his hands in defense, stammering out apologies, excuses, lies. He begged, his voice quivering with desperation, his eyes wide with terror. But Alya didn't waver. She spoke slowly, deliberately, each word dripping with the pain he had caused her. "All this time I trusted you. I thought of you as family. But you broke that. You took something from me I can never get back," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Karim's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but Alya pressed closer, her eyes blazing with fury. Then she did something that shocked him to his core. She laughed, a low, cold sound that echoed in the quiet night. "You thought you could use me, control me. But look at you now," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Who has the power now?" Then, she did something that shocked him to his core. She laughed, a low, cold sound that echoed in the quiet night. "You thought you could use me, control me. But look at you now," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Who has the power now?" She let him go but kept the knife in her hand as she stepped back. Karim stumbled, nearly falling in his haste to get away from her. He looked back over his shoulder, terror etched on his face, the full weight of his shame crashing down on him. For the first time, he knew what it felt like to be at the mercy of another. As he scrambled away, Alya called out after him, her voice strong, unwavering. "If you ever come near me or anyone else again, I'll make sure the whole world knows who you really are," she warned. Karim nodded frantically, his fear palpable, and disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Karim avoided eye contact with everyone, too ashamed to face his own family, his congregation, or even Alya. He carried the memory of that night with him, haunted by the rage he had seen in her eyes. And Alya, though still scarred by her experiences, felt a sense of justice. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of his control lifting, freeing her from the silence that had once bound her. In the days that followed, Karim was quieter, his sermons lacking the fire they once had. Alya knew that her revenge had left him shaken, and although it didn't erase the pain he had caused her, it had given her the strength to reclaim her voice. She walked with her head held higher, knowing that while her scars might never fully heal, she had taken back the power he had stolen from her. For Alya, justice was not just a matter of the law. It was a matter of reclaiming her own sense of self, of letting Karim know that he was no longer untouchable. She carried on with her life, stronger and wiser, knowing that while revenge could not undo the past, it had allowed her to move forward. And for Karim, the memory of that night served as a reminder of his own vulnerability, a haunting echo of the fear he had once imposed on others. Then, she did something that shocked him to his core. She laughed, a low, cold sound that echoed in the quiet night. "You thought you could use me, control me. But look at you now," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Who has the power now?" She let him go but kept the knife in her hand as she stepped back. Karim stumbled, nearly falling in his haste to get away from her. He looked back over his shoulder, terror etched on his face, the full weight of his shame crashing down on him. For the first time, he knew what it felt like to be at the mercy of another. As he scrambled away, Alya called out after him, her voice strong, unwavering. "If you ever come near me or anyone else again, I'll make sure the whole world knows who you really are," she warned. Karim nodded frantically, his fear palpable, and disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Karim avoided eye contact with everyone, too ashamed to face his own family, his congregation, or even Alya. He carried the memory of that night with him, haunted by the rage he had seen in her eyes. And Alya, though still scarred by her experiences, felt a sense of justice. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of his control lifting, freeing her from the silence that had once bound her. In the days that followed, Karim was quieter, his sermons lacking the fire they once had. Alya knew that her revenge had left him shaken, and although it didn't erase the pain he had caused her, it had given her the strength to reclaim her voice. She walked with her head held higher, knowing that while her scars might never fully heal, she had taken back the power he had stolen from her. For Alya, justice was not just a matter of the law, it was a matter of reclaiming her own sense of self, of letting Karim know that he was no longer untouchable. She carried on with her life, stronger and wiser, knowing that while revenge could not undo the past, it had allowed her to move forward. And for Karim, the memory of that night served as a reminder of his own vulnerability, a haunting echo of the fear he had once imposed on others.